The one funny thing I'll say very briefly to you is that, running a refinery, you run, about 6,000 pieces of equipment in a refinery. I
Wow.
mean, sometimes it's more than that, pumps and compressors and all of these good things. And what struck me immediately was I had more data and computer systems monitoring those 6,000 pumps, compressors, and turbines than I did hospitals have on their human beings. And I thought, this is wild. I used to have a pager on my hip back in 1996 that would tell me that pump number 32147 was going to fail next week. It's a bit like knowing Mark's going to have a heart attack. I did not have that for human beings, and you might argue we don't have that today. That's criminal. So that really attracted me into saying, well, why doesn't innovation and technology start to solve those problems for real in the real world and more quickly than they are? And then that just sucked me in completely. And here I am 30 years later, still trying to solve that problem at scale.
But I think the issue comes down to, the LLMs aren't perfect. If you don't put in all the information, or if you put in different information, it's not going to spit out an answer. Consistency is an issue with them too, because you may not get the same answer with the same information put in. And then really it's liability. Right now, a lot of these companies, and you can look at Doctronic's terms and conditions about it, the user takes most of the liability if there's a mistake or an error. If a clinician's involved, then that moves up to the clinician, but at no time is the vendor liable. And I think that again, bias, I'm a physician, so, take with a grain of salt. I think that's a problem, because if you don't have that imperative to fix something and put it into your product cycle or your development cycle, it only gets fixed when you feel like it.
And for several reasons, we learned that we don't have enough physical space to bring all the clinicians and patients back together in person again, right? We've designed models of care that actually harness the capability of our docs being at home 1 day a week and being able to treat patients in their home as well. So we don't have physical space to deliver all the care that we should be. That was one really eye-opening and interesting thing that happened. And then the future is essentially putting a layer of artificial intelligence in between us and the patient. So we don't need to be involved in all of those conversations, but the artificial intelligence can be an intermediary when we could be what I call the human in the loop, right? So there's a time when we need to step in, we need to make a decision, we need to course correct. And I think that's the exciting future of really digital health, right?
Yeah.
Having this in-between layer of artificial intelligence and even just simple automation, if it's not even AI, but just some automation tools that keep people healthy, happy, and then surface one day they're no longer that way and help us get involved.
I read a statistic the other day that I never really saw quantified, which was basically the number of fatalities due to medical errors. And it is the fifth leading cause of death in America is medical error. If you avoided 50% of those errors, whether that's a prescription error or whether that's just a misdiagnosis, it could be anything, right? I mean, can AI help catch, backstop? I was watching a baseball game yesterday, and they have now the challenge that says, was this a ball or a strike? Is there a way you could, after the doctor makes a decision, there be an AI backstop that says,
like a review.
Review, exactly. So but it sounds like science fiction, but I don't think it is.
So in an environment like that, world model excels exceedingly well. So from a CEO standpoint, now a world model tries to give AI that kind of simulation ability where an LLM predicts the next word, but here the world model tries to predict the next action, the state of the world that changes, is really important. So especially in healthcare, Mark, and Noah knows this, that could mean predicting readmission risk after discharge is far more important for me for running my business than predicting what happens if I make some mistake here and there. So, but I mean, it boils down to how a workflow changes affects the patient, and then that translates to the bottom line. That's how I feel as a CEO for a healthcare company. For me, technology takes a backseat. how it impacts the bottom line, how it impacts the revenue is what is important for me. And world model actually gives you a path to that direction for you.
Makes sense.
So the innovation team's job is to find interesting things. They have no budget. They have pretty much no authority to deploy at scale. And founders constantly make the mistake their enthusiasm, I should say, for buying intent. But interesting, is not a purchase order, right? The enterprise contract lives with a completely different room, security, legal, compliance, and a budget owner with a P&L who has to live with this thing that they're essentially selling. That's not a gate being difficult. That's just the actual buyer. I watched this from my time on the other side at Shields. The deals that closed were the ones where there had already been a relationship and where we built a relationship with the people who'd have to own it. It's not just the people who were excited in the first meeting. So, the fix is kind of counterintuitive. Get to the skeptics early. The founder who walks in and says, introduce me to your CSIO and your compliance officer now, not at the end, is the one who closes, in my opinion. The boring rooms, or not even to coin it that, because it's not the right term, are where the deals, I think, actually live or die.
In healthcare, initially it actually raises the cost because it adds another layer because of what I'll call the trust factor. We're actually going to do a white paper on this. Trust is such a big part of healthcare because you're dealing with people's lives. And in the initial adoption of technology in healthcare, nobody trusts it. Nobody. Zero. And it adds cost until the trust component engenders and people could say, okay, yeah, this really does work. Yeah, this really can save me time. Yeah, this really can get me home to my kids. Yeah, this, I'm not going to have to see 20 different patients in a half an hour, right? Once that trust factor, starts to hit, then you start to bend the cost curve. But that could take a long time.